Your grandparents first.
Okay, I'll talk about my father first.
Okay.
My father. My father came here in 1900, and he went to see his brother who lived in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. He was there for 2 days, and they let him sleep in a barn. And he left immediately, and he went back to Europe. Then he came to the United States in 1900. How he got back here, I'll never know. But he made it again. And you know, when you go on those boats in Europe, you're way down below in the lower cabin. You don't even see anything from outside. So my father and my mother and Sylvia was about 9 years old, and she was on the boat, and there was a woman wearing a hat, and she said to my mother, "That hat don't look good on that lady." And when the woman took the hat off, my sister threw it in the ocean. And then they came to America, and my cousins, it was a very hot day. And Sylvia said, "America? They're going barefoot?"
The golden land.
The golden land, this is supposed to be the golden land. And then we moved, I don't know how my father did it, then we moved on the east side of Chicago. And in those days, it was a Gentile neighborhood. And my father, we moved in, I don't know if he was, and then he'd be on his horse and wagon, and all the goyim would throw stones at him. He said, "I'm staying, let them move." So within a year, they all moved out. And let me tell you about the building we lived in. We lived in I think my father bought it, it was a 3-flat, and your washroom was in the hall, and your other neighbor used it. 2 neighbors used the washroom in the hall. Picturing yourself going up midnight, going to the toilet.
It came to America, they settled on the east side. And then when conditions got better, my father and the family moved what you call the old west side. And I was only 2 years old.
So
my father bought the building, and that's where we grew up. And went to school there. We went to the Herzl School, and Ralph went to that school. All of us went to that school. And let's see, then my father bought a building on Lawndale and 16th. There were 7 stores and 3 apartments. And he used to walk with his cane. He was so proud of the building that he owned. And then from there, my father sold the building, and he bought a 2-flat on, which was called Clifton Park, which is now Drake Avenue. And Sylvia was, she was very handy. She had wonderful style. She set up the apartment with furniture and drapes. We were so proud. And we met so many friends that came to visit. We had all kinds of friends.
Now, was everyone born in that building?
No, they were born, let's see, we were
born
all
in the hospital.
and all of them were born in the hospital. Of course, Harry and Sylvia were born in Europe, in Poland. And Janet and I were the only 2 that were born in the hospital, the Mary Thompson Hospital.
Where is that?
It's in Chicago.
It's still in existence.
It's on the north side. I don't know about my father. My father was an orphan. He had 1 sister that had died in the pogrom. That was when they were killing all the Jews in Poland, right? My sister was killed in the pogrom in Europe. He had 1 sister. When he came to this country, in New York, he was with a brother. And the brother disappeared, and he never saw his brother again. And when they asked him, "What's his name?" they said, "Your name Cohen?" He said, "Yeah, that's my name, Cohen." And they gave him, that's the name they used through the years.
Well, the reason he changed the name to Cohen, because he bought a horse and wagon, and the wagon said Cohen, so he used that name. That was the reason. Name is Brzezowski, but he kept the name of Cohen, and that's what happened. And that's how my father made a living. He was a peddler, and he did very well until Harry grew up. Then he bought his first truck, and they went peddling through the alleys, And they made my father made a
I don't
very
think you ever
good
went
living.
through alleys.
They sure did. Even Ralph said to Michael, you want to make a living? Get a truck and go through the alleys, and there's a fortune in the alley.
And my father, I used to go to business, and I used to drive him to different places
Factories.
all day long, and he made a good salary on that. And every day he went to different places, and I sat in the car downstairs, and he came out, and then we went home. And after that, every day I used to take him to different places. I can't remember the places that he went, and Harry used to pick up the junk and put it in the car, in the truck. And everybody was very happy to have him around. And my mother was very happy. So we all were all together, which was very nice. They wanted our flat, and we moved to the third floor.
Depression.
And they took our first floor away because they liked my father as a landlord. That was about, I don't know how many years it was. So that was our last. Then we moved to another house, a beautiful house. We had a lot of fun there. And about that was it.
World War, we had depression here. Men were selling apples downtown, and people were killing themselves in LaSalle Street. They actually threw themselves blue. They lost so much money in those days. Everything went down to nothing. And then our president came in, President Roosevelt. He's the one that reconstructed everything.
School. My father gave me 50 cents for lunch and car fare.
That's a lot of money.
And I used to walk home because I wanted to save 40 cents.
You and Janet.
And when Janet went to high school, he reduced us to 40 cents a piece.
Was that because of the Depression?
That was during the Depression, yes.
I bought this whole building. I think we had about 10 stores, and it was during Depression, and everybody wanted to move out. My father said, don't move out. It's better to have somebody in the stores. When times get better, you could pay the rent. So they were there for about 2 years. Nobody paid rent. So
What kind of stores were those in those buildings?
well, one was a delicatessen, one was a fruit store, and one was a cleaner, one was a bakery, and a shoe store. So when we needed shoes in those days, we'd go to the shoe store, we'd buy shoes we didn't have to pay for. And went to the bakery, we didn't have to pay. Money for us, honey. Don't forget my father. And then when we all started working, and they said to us, if you're late one more day, we're going to fire all of us. I got them all jobs at Mandel Brothers then. And I said to my father, why don't you wait? So he said, why should I wake you girls? I don't make no profit on you. You never give me anything for the week. That's what he told us.
Ondale.
No, Drake.
Drake, the two.
Drake.
What was that house like?
Two-story house.
Well, three
And it
bedrooms.
was wonderful living there.
It had 3
And we were
bedrooms.
right off of the Kedzie. It was a beautiful building.
So
And and the show was close to my father. He went every Saturday to show. And what was it? It was a beautiful place to be. We fixed it up gorgeous. And it was lovely.
I had a room for myself, and even to this day, I have a sister with me.
Well, that's very good.
And my sister Sylvia and I slept together, and we wasn't double beds, Eddie. They were just twin beds.
We were young, there was a whole mob. So we had 2 double beds in one of the bedrooms. Ralph and Harry slept in one bed, and Janet and I slept in the other bed. We thought nothing of it. And then later on, they built a room in the basement, and then Ralph slept in that basement.
Mother came from a family of 6 girls. There were no boys, all 6 girls, and she came to this country. And my aunt, who was a widow, lived in our building. My father already had bought a building, and she used to scrub floors, so my father said, you're not scrubbing floors anymore. And He took care, no, in those days, the city wouldn't give you nothing. My father took care of, what was there were three girls and 2 boys. My father took care of them for years. They lived in our building and they never paid any rent. But my aunt was wonderful to my mother, just like Violet and I are. They were so close that people just couldn't get over it.
Do you remember your aunt's name?
My aunt's name was, Aunt Bertha, no, what was our auntie's name?
Sarah, was it Sarah?
No. Sarah? Well, let's say it was Sarah. Aunt Sarah, yeah. Her name was Aunt Sarah. And she had 5 children, and they lived in our building. My father had bought this building. They lived with us until the children were able to work on their own.
What kind of cookies?
No, who did the cooking?
Violet
bread,
never,
mama
Violet
bread.
never worked.
My mother used to make challies on Thursday, so we would have it for Friday.
And gefilte
Very
bread.
religious people we were
And
in
on
those
Friday, there was no
days.
holly left over.
And everything was beautiful. We always kept the house very nice.
Every night, but when we were young, we were always together. My mother always had to buy a lot of food. You know, after all, we were 10 people sitting down to eat. And I remember Sunday morning when we get up, the first one up, we'd get the bagel. And if you got up late, you wouldn't have a bagel.
So she and Janet told them about the both of you. You would get up early in the morning to grab their 4 bagels and put it away when they got up at 12 o'clock to eat it. Otherwise, somebody would eat their bagels up.
He used to make ice cream sandwiches in the basement, and he started selling them.
Eskimo
He
pie.
and his
Eskimo pies were
boyfriend.
so pop,
They
too.
made a lot of money making the ice cream sandwiches.
Uh-huh.
And what else did he
He sold
do?
them at the size.
Then he got a
At
truck,
the cups part.
and he became very rich
No,
with the junk business.
he had.
And he went all over the city, and he made a lot of money.
Sister Sylvia was very beautiful. When she'd go to work in the morning, the neighbors would be out there to see how she was dressed up. She always looked gorgeous. And as the years went on, she was still working. And when we had the wedding, we had a wedding on a Tuesday night. That was in the hall on Roosevelt Road. Then she met Harry, and Harry came to our house. Her husband came from a family, 7 boys.
7 boys, yeah.
There were 7 boys in her husband's family.
Girl always married the boy next door because you lived very close to, to families. Like now they don't live. The children get married today, grow up, they immediately move out of their parents' home. But in those days, they stayed in their home until they got married.
Case, Minnie Minosa used to live next door to you, so if this was 50 years ago, Aunt Ann, you would have married Minnie Minosa, wouldn't you?
Oh yes, he's a very nice guy.
West. And coming home, my brother picked us up in a wagon, and we were hiding ourselves because it was terrible if we saw our friends coming home in a wagon. So we covered ourselves in the wagon with a horse in the front, and we couldn't wait until we got home. Wasn't that funny? Yeah.
My cousin got married, and my father bought an old carriage, you know what I mean? A beautiful carriage. They had blinds,
And we
and
went
they
there
had
to see them.
one old
And he
horse,
picked us
and my
up from
sister
the
Sylvia refused to go in there because she was older. Don't forget she was 9 years older than me.
Different things.
And she refused to go there, and she took a streetcar to the wedding. She would not be seen in that old car of my father's, an old
All day long.
horse and buggy with with blinds on.
Never worked for anybody. He was always with my father, always on the horse and wagon. And then, of course, later on, they bought the truck. And then Harry got married, and he married Lil. And Lil had 2 children from a former marriage. There was a delicatessen when we lived on Ridgeway, around the corner, and Harry used to go in there and get a chocolate phosphate. And he met Lil there, and He used to come home and he'd say, the wedding is on and the wedding is off. The wedding is on and the wedding. And he was very fond of Maxine. So he went there for advice. And Maxine says, she's a very lovely lady. And we never met Lil till they actually got married.
I had her 2 children. They were very nice. And when they moved into this other building, we had Lil made dinner. She was a good cook. And her 2 older children then, what's their name?
Herbie and Shirley. Herbie and Shirley.
So they were going to a movie, and I said to Lil, well, Violet and I and Rooney, we'll help you with dishes. Oh no, she said, that's their job. When they get home from the movies, they take care of the dishes. We do not touch it on this family. That's their obligation. How do you like that?
You than them.
Well, she's 8 years older than me.
I was 8 years old when she was a baby.
Her sisters were inseparable. We're like let's see, flies on what kind of paper that stick together. Even Ralph, all of us. It's a very unusual family, and we weren't just sisters. We were friends, and if anything happened, we'd call each other up, you know, and sit down and have a meeting and try to straighten out things.
I started working at Mandel's, and I said to my father, I've got to work on Saturday. He said, well, that's your life. You do what you want to do, because my father was very ultra-religious. And then I worked at Mandel's for a long time, and then I was leaving Mandel's because I went on Michigan Avenue. So I banked in the First National Bank that was downtown, and I think I had maybe about $200 or so in the bank. And one of the presidents came down from the bank and he said, aren't we treating you well? Why are you taking your money out of this bank? I said, well, I won't be on State Street anymore. I'm going to Michigan Boulevard. He said, but you can still bank here. I said, it'll be a little easier if I bank downtown. He came down to see me, the guy, the big shot at the bank. Why am I leaving the bank? Would they ever say that to anybody now? Never. Not in 1,000 years. Richard Weebles, which was Mandel Brothers, and it was the height of Depression, so that maybe about 25 or 50 would stand in line, and they would take maybe the first 10 people. Those of us who had a little money, we went to the movies because in those days they were acts, so the movies were 25 cents. So the ones who were rich, like we were rich, we would go to the movies and see a movie and see a play.
I gotta ask you one question. Who was Victor?
Well, Victor was a friend of mine. I've known for many years. I don't know if he's alive or dead.
Okay.
A certain fellow was working with me at Mandel's, and he said to me, why don't you come to me to California? I said, why? I said, oh, I could never move away from Chicago, because he was a writer in those days. And he said, I'm going to California. That's the place to live, and that's where you could become famous. Then another fellow I met working again, he was from London. And he wanted me to go meet his parents in London. I said, oh, I could never do that in my lifetime. I could never move away from my parents' house.
We were kids. We were all young. We went to Lake Geneva to see my father's brother. And we had an open car, a big car.
A Winton City.
And we got there. We didn't get there. The car broke down.
Oh my God.
We finally got somebody, but we had to have it all fixed, and we didn't get there. That was the worst thing in our life.
Because my mother, she know
Yeah,
what,
we used
you know
to
what
make
used
the
to flick chickens?
Oh,
You know what that is?
No.
Flick,
take the feathers off.
take the feathers off the chicken. They used to bring live chickens, and my mother used to have them killed because it was kosher.
And who brought those chickens?
They brought them from Lake Geneva. I don't know how they got to our house. I'll never know.
How often did they bring them?
For holidays, they came to our house. Sisters, when she came to America, she never found out where they are or where they were. And finally, she discovered that one of her sisters lived in
New York.
No, one lived in one of the suburbs we used to go.
Grand Rapids.
Grand Rapids. That my mother found out she had 5 sisters. she found out that one sister lived in Grand Rapids. How she got in touch with her, we'll never know. And they finally came to Chicago to see my mother. Then she went to New York. She hadn't seen her sisters in 25 years. And she decided to take a trip to New York. And I had a cousin, oh, he knew everything. So he got my mother a sleeper on the train, and he said, hold on to your money all night, because you know they can rob you. And she took Charlotte with, Charlotte was 2 years old then, and she went to see her sister, who she hadn't seen in 25 years. 2 sisters were living.
Make the ice cream in the basement.
No, he worked for Harry Greenberg's brothers selling pillows.
That was the precious.
They were in the pillow business. And then he didn't stay with them very long. And then, of course, he was a peddler, you know, working with my father. And then he worked on his own. And gradually, he went in business for himself.
He was near Sears years ago, that's on the west side, selling merchandise. And he met a man. The man said he perforates metal. So Ralph said, what is it? He said, you'll learn. I think he sold it to Ralph right then and there.
Thing on Lawndale and 16, and there was what they call a pool room, where all the young men would gather from the neighborhood and visit. And her uncle had a tailor shop, and she brought all her clothes to the tailor shop to be cleaned because she knew there were a lot of men there. And that's how they met from the tailor shop. First wedding. They were married in the Dritchener Shul, and then we went to Maxine's mother's house, and they made chicken and we ate there. That's where the wedding was, in Maxine's mother's house.
Largest factories making men's pants here, and they went bankrupt.
And who was that?
Maxine's father, Mr.
Mr.
Goldman. Sister Violet did everything. She stayed at home with my mother. She would cook, bake, and Charlotte was the baby then, and she took care of her. And as we grow up, then she met her husband.
Irving.
Irving, she met Irving. A girlfriend of her introduced her to Irving. One of her best girlfriends.
We had a very nice wedding in the house, and it was beautiful. Where was it?
On the south side.
Yeah, south side. And it was beautiful.
I think we lived on Drexel
They were
Boulevard
all
then,
there.
didn't we?
No, it was on the
In
south
the
side.
living-
It was
yeah.
on Drexel Boulevard, that's the south
Very
side.
nice.
Father wore, the mayor of Chicago, at that time, Mayor Kelly, my sister Sylvia knew his wife very well, and she said, my sister's getting married. So Mrs. Kelly says, fine, I got a beautiful dress for the bride. And she wore Mrs. Kelly's dress, was a beautiful white dress.
South side. My mother and father moved to the south side too, but they didn't like it there. My father used to come from home with the truck with Harry. They didn't like it, so they went back to the west side,
Went back to their home.
and that was it.
Lived on the second floor, and they couldn't pay rent for 5 years. But they'd come downstairs, and the little girl says, we need hot water, we need hot steam. So my father said, well, maybe you pay a little rent, I'll give you a little hot steam. But he always gave them hot steam. They lived with us for 5 years, and 2 sons were lawyers. In those days, they couldn't get no job. So Janet, a couple of years ago, went to a party, and the one girl recognized her. She said, aren't you one of the Cone girls? She said, yes. Well, who are you? She says, you know, we lived in your father's building for 5 years, and we couldn't pay rent. And it was simply wonderful. And your mother even made all the holly and gave it to her. But for 5 years they lived in our building, they couldn't pay rent. It was depression.
To high school, I took a commercial job. I wanted to be a stenographer, but tried to get a job. So anyway, Ann got me a job at Mandel Brothers. And it was like we were extras. Whenever there was a sale, they would let us work there. And I'll never forget, Janet was so jealous because they called me and they didn't call her. Finally, I got a job at Mandel's. I felt like a millionaire. I was making $15 a week. I saved 10 and I spent 5. And that's how I saved my money. And then, of course, my mother used to go to charity meetings, and I had to give her $5. I didn't want to give up the $5.
Yeah.
Telling me?
Chicky and Joe and the two children, they rented a cottage in Michigan City. And I worked for Ralph at that time. And I drove the car. It was on Shabbos. Who would go there? But in those days, they didn't care. So Joe and Chicky and not Debbie. Debbie wasn't born yet. Harvey. They were all on the beach. You know, used to go over to the beach. They had a beautiful beach in Michigan City. And Joe was laying there, and they all left, and I was talking to him. And then there was a dance there. He seemed so interested. Sure enough, he never came over. The next day, the next morning he came over, and he sat on the porch, and I drove him home. All on the same day, I drove him home, and he came up to our apartment. Annie and I had an apartment. Came up to the apartment, calls up his sister Annie, and he says, I met the girl that I'm going to marry. That was in July. 2 months after that, I got married.
Where was your wedding at?
The wedding was in the Ralph made my wedding in the temple in Oak Park. That's where Ralph was, you know, where the funeral was.
Sure.
Because they lived in Oak Park in those days. And then, of course, we went to Colorado for our honeymoon.
Did you go skiing?
Huh?
Did you go skiing in Colorado?
Did you get what? We went, we were traveling. You know, we went, you know where they have the faces in the mountains? Where is that?
Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, we went to Mount Rushmore.
I was there too.
And we traveled, you know. Then we finally ended up at where his sister lived in Colorado. And then, of course, we stayed there with them a week. And then I went back home. I worked for Ralph at that time. I worked for Accurate.
I got her a job at Saks Fifth Avenue years. That was her first job. And she worked in the shoe department. And then she always would take a long lunch hour. Then finally, her and Nate got married. She got married on her lunch hour in the city hall. Doing anything, and you're just sitting here. So then she quit there. But later, when Saks opened up in the Old Orchard, she worked there for about 5 years. They took her there. And that's where she worked. She had a lot of jobs. See, and she said her name is Strauss. Well, you know, S-T-R-A-U-S is Gentile. The woman's so happy. Oh, she said, so wonderful to get a nice Gentile girl. Linda said, I'm Jewish. So the woman said, I can't hire you. So Linda went back to the agency, and they bawled the woman out, and they gave her a fine for saying that.
Huh.
Oh, yeah, they were they didn't want any, they were Jewish, honey. But wait a minute, Marshall Fields, they would never take it, my Marshall Fields, nobody was Jewish there.
His mother on Clifton Park.
The same street as us.
Now, I don't know if they met at a dance, and you know, they were neighbors. They became very good friends, just like I said before. The girl married the boy next door, and they went together, and they finally got married. Janet and Nate were married in the house, and Nate was very angry because he had to come and paint the washroom the day he got married.
Yeah.
He was a painter.
In the beginning, she got herself a job downtown. She always had little jobs. One day she was selling clothes, one day she worked in all. So she worked in this office, not too long, and there was a mirror there, and she walked through the mirror.
No, a glass door.
Walked through a glass door. And she made it. Then she met Joe. I don't know how she met Joe. Oh, I don't remember.
She met him in those days. Fellas used to rent cottages. And she met him in Michigan City. She says, oh, I met a wonderful fella. And that was before the war, you know. And of course, she got married in the house too, Charlotte. And then of course, Joe went into the army, and she followed him. I think he was stationed in either in Texas and then into Washington, the state of Washington. And of course he wasn't much of a soldier. He used to be on guard duty for the enemy on the outside.
You picture him on guard duty?
Yeah.
On guard duty for the enemy.
And Janet's mother-in-law had a man who was a caterer. And Sylvia was so mad the sandwiches were so heavy. And in those days, in the bathroom, we kept ice, and that's where we kept our pop bottles. You filled up your bathtub with ice, and all your drinks were in the bathtub.
Those days, we had a stove in the living room, and on Shabbos, the stove, the heat used to go down. We never had like a furnace or gas like you have today. So we would all crawl in the bed with my mother, and we had the parony that was a feather quilt, and we all got under the feather quilt, and my mother would tell us the story about the barley. So you want to hear the story?
Yes.
Well, when we were little,
They went to shul.
the barley, my mother and father went to shul, and all of a sudden there was a knock on the door. My mother said, "Don't open the door. There's a barley that escaped from Lincoln Park Zoo, and he's in the neighborhood." So, sure enough, the barley came to the door, and he said, "I am your mother. I'll give you bread and butter." But the kids knew that didn't sound like a barley, so they all hid. They hid under the bed. Who was there?
Harold.
Ralph hid under the bed, and Annie hid on top of the bed, and one hid in the icebox, all over the house. And sure enough, the bear came in, and he ate up Annie, and he ate up Ralph, and he ate up Violet. And the bear was left the house, and he fell asleep under the porch, and my mother and father came home from shul, and the only one that he didn't eat up was Charlotte. So Charlotte says, "Oh, Ma, the barley was here, and he ate up all my sisters and brothers." So my mother says, "We have to get the big butcher knife and cut open the bear," and everybody went out of his belly.
That's the barley story.
That's the story about the
Okay.
barley.